Welcome back to part 6 of our series on aerial photography of eclipses by the predecessors to the U.S. Air Force here in Dayton. Well, our last episode closed with our first real attempt to do this. Even though the results weren't as great as we would have liked, we certainly had opportunities to try again. The next opportunity, and perhaps the biggest one, happened in 1925. And this one, fortunately for us, went over a larger swath of the country, but particularly it went over New York City. As you might imagine, just like now, of course, New York is the center of the universe, right? So it was a big deal in the whole country. Importantly, this 1925 eclipse in going over New York went over one of the Air Service's major facilities just outside of New York City, Mitchell Field on Long Island. Well, we had a lot of airplanes there, which provided an opportunity for us to take pictures of this eclipse using equipment that was already in place. And once again, the Navy had the same idea. They were going to bring in a fleet of airplanes to take pictures, and they were also going to use an airship. So you think about like Hindenburg style airship, and they're going to do this because that's a nice big stable platform, for taking pictures and so forth. So once again, you've got this inter-service sort of rivalry going to take pictures. Well, for our team at McCook Field, we get hooked up with one of the first characters we talked about in this story, and that was Dr. Todd. You remember the astronomer who first had this idea in 1914 of taking pictures using airplanes of eclipses, but was foiled because of the start of World War I. Well, he was in charge of the department at Amherst University, or the University of Amherst, which is in New York. So he got in contact with the Air Service. The Air Service chief went to McCook Field and said, "Hey, we need you guys to take pictures again." Well, while Stevens had done the expedition 2 years earlier, now our friend George Goddard was back in charge of the photographic laboratory at McCook Field, so this fell on him to do. So he took his team up to Mitchell Field to leverage the existing units' equipment to take these pictures, and was going to really spearhead this effort. So when the eclipse happens, this is in January, so it's pretty cold. It's actually pretty snowy in New York. The exact date was January 24th. That morning, brutally cold for everybody. It's not a really great time to be out and about watching an eclipse, but it's especially not a great time to be flying at high altitudes in airplanes. But George Goddard was pretty experienced, as was his team. He had a little bit of an ace up his sleeve when it came to getting up there in the morning. While everybody else was trying to start their airplanes and their engines were frozen solid, he had the foresight to preheat the oil for his airplane in a stove in the hangar, put that in the airplane so it cranked right up, and he was able to get up in the air before anybody else did, to kind of get the best position to take these pictures. So this whole fleet of airplanes gets up there. You've got the Army guys, you've got the Navy guys. The eclipse is going to happen. If you look at the front page of the New York Times, like everybody in New York is out there going to watch it. I mean, work stops as people are crowding rooftops in the streets, the parks, everywhere to go see this. It's a really big deal to take these pictures. And of course, the airplane fleets are out there. You've got the Navy's dirigible out there to take pictures and all that. Well, once again, the results end up being a little bit mixed for some of them. The Navy's dirigible, they end up having a few problems. As you might imagine, taking a picture of the eclipse from the gondola hanging underneath the dirigible is not so good. So you actually have people trying to get on top of the dirigible, which you could back then to take the pictures, but that's not an ideal setup for bringing in large cameras and all of that equipment. But it's Goddard who has the real success here. He's got the right equipment because he's been helping develop this high altitude equipment. He's got the right airplanes because they developed that technology in McCook Field. So he goes out there, flies around, he's at altitude when the eclipse happened. He takes some good pictures of this. When he gets down, they're very excited. They take these pictures, they hand them over to our friend Dr. Todd to take a look at, and he is just blown away. And I'm going to read you a direct quote here. Here's what Todd had to say. Remember, this is a guy who has seen 19 eclipses in his lifetime. This was, I think, number 17 for him. It was right near the end of his career. All of my previous experiences covering the face of the Earth were but rehearsals for this one. And the aid of aviation brought me nearer than I had dreamed to the realization of a lifetime. Remember, he's been obsessed with eclipses for decades, for nearly 40 years at this point. The experiments made at Mitchell Field yesterday open a new era for the combined science of astronomy and aviation. The combined science of astronomy and aviation. He concludes that when he saw Goddard's picture, he says, "Goddard's picture is the greatest eclipse picture in the history of astronomy." So think about that. They've been taking pictures for 50 years of eclipses, and this one was the greatest one. And in fact, that picture made the front pages of newspapers around the country and brought a lot of fame to the Army Air Service, and did exactly what we were hoping it would do. Is that brought us the positive attention we needed to help, argue that, hey, this is money being well spent on research and development and so forth. So Goddard was very pleased with himself, and it helped contribute to the science. And in fact, one of these early pictures of actually the corona of the sun, because you've got, once you're above that big chunk of the Earth's atmosphere at 20 or 30,000 feet, you can get much clearer pictures. And so you get that kind of bright outline, and then on the pictures you can actually see these light bands that were described a little bit earlier, which really helped astronomers understand what's happening during the eclipse and make other scientific observations. And that really set that field of science a step ahead of where it had been if they did not have the availability of airplanes, and thanks to George Goddard.